I'll never forget the day an elite blonde lawyer publicly humiliated me in a packed courtroom, treating me like trash because of my simple clothes and quiet demeanor. She had no idea I was married to the billionaire who owned the very law firm she worked for. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. So let me take you back to that devastating day that turned my world upside down and taught me the most powerful lesson about standing up for yourself when everyone expects you to stay silent. My name is Jessica Rodriguez. I'm 26 years old, and my life journey has been nothing like the fairy tale people imagine when they discover I'm married to one of the most successful attorneys in the country. Just 3 years ago, I was working double shifts at a local diner, barely making ends meet while caring for my elderly grandmother who raised me after my parents died in a car accident when I was 12. I lived in a tiny studio apartment above Mrs. Patterson's bakery, where the smell of fresh bread would wake me up every morning at 5 a.m. My wardrobe consisted of 3 pairs of jeans, some comfortable sweaters, and the same pair of worn sneakers I'd been wearing since community college. I drove a 15-year-old Honda Civic that made strange noises but somehow kept running, and my biggest luxury was the occasional coffee from the gas station down the street. My grandmother always taught me that a person's worth isn't measured by their possessions but by their character and how they treat others. She'd say, "Jessica, honey, you keep your head high and your heart kind, no matter what storms come your way." Those words became my anchor through every difficult moment, including the day I met the man who would change my entire life. It was a rainy Thursday evening when Alexander Thornfield first walked into Murphy's Diner where I worked. He wasn't like our usual customers who came in wearing work boots and flannel shirts after long construction days. Alexander wore an expensive suit that somehow still looked perfect despite the downpour outside, and he carried himself with this quiet confidence that made people instinctively look twice. But what struck me most wasn't his obvious wealth or polished appearance. It was how he treated everyone around him with genuine respect. He thanked the busboy who filled his water glass, complimented old Pete who cooked his burger, and when I accidentally spilled coffee on his briefcase while juggling too many tables, he just smiled and said it gave the leather character. For 6 months, Alexander came to Murphy's Diner every Tuesday and Friday evening, always sitting in booth number 7. Always ordering the same grilled cheese sandwich and tomato soup that reminded him of his childhood. We'd talk during my breaks about everything from classic literature to social justice issues, and he'd listen to my dreams of maybe someday helping people who couldn't afford legal representation. He never mentioned his profession during those early conversations, never name-dropped important clients or talked about courtroom victories. He just seemed genuinely interested in my thoughts and opinions, treating me like my ideas mattered even though I was just a diner waitress with a community college degree. When he finally asked me to dinner at a real restaurant, I said yes because he made me feel intelligent and valued in a way no one ever had before. It wasn't until our 4th date, when he picked me up in a car that probably cost more than most people's houses, that I realized Alexander Thornfield wasn't just some successful businessman. He was the Alexander Thornfield, founding partner of Thornfield & Associates, one of the most prestigious law firms on the entire East Coast, with offices in 12 major cities and a client list that included Fortune 500 companies and celebrity clients. Our relationship developed quickly after that revelation, but not because I was impressed by his wealth or status. Alexander loved that I challenged his thinking, that I brought a different perspective to his privileged world, and that I never treated him differently once I learned about his success. I love that despite his incredible achievements, he remained humble and genuinely caring about making positive changes in people's lives. When we got married 14 months later, it was a small ceremony in my grandmother's garden with just our closest family members present. No society photographers or elaborate receptions, just 2 people who genuinely loved and respected each other, promising to build a life together based on mutual support and shared values. But adjusting to being the wife of such a prominent attorney has been the most challenging part of this entire journey. Alexander always encourages me to stay true to myself, to dress however makes me comfortable, and never to change my authentic personality for anyone's approval. That sounds wonderful in theory, but when you're constantly surrounded by people in designer suits carrying expensive briefcases, it's incredibly difficult not to feel like you don't belong in their sophisticated world. I still prefer my comfortable jeans and soft sweaters, my canvas sneakers, and simple jewelry that belonged to my grandmother. Alexander says these qualities are exactly what he fell in love with, that my authenticity and genuine nature are what make me special in his eyes. But sometimes that authenticity comes with consequences I never anticipated or prepared myself to handle. About 8 months ago, Alexander started receiving concerning reports about one of his senior associates at the downtown office. Victoria Pemberton was supposedly one of their most talented lawyers, specializing in family court cases. But several clients had filed complaints about her condescending attitude and unprofessional behavior toward people she perceived as beneath her social status. These weren't just minor personality conflicts. Clients were saying Victoria made them feel stupid for not understanding legal terminology, mocked their clothing choices during meetings, and treated them with obvious contempt if they couldn't afford the firm's premium service packages. One woman wrote that Victoria had made her cry during her divorce proceedings by commenting on her inappropriate courtroom attire, loud enough for everyone to hear. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Alexander was traveling extensively at the time, working on a major corporate merger that required his presence in 3 different states over several weeks. He couldn't personally investigate these complaints, but they were serious enough to potentially damage the firm's reputation for treating all clients with dignity and respect regardless of their background or financial situation. That's when I volunteered to help by attending one of Victoria's court sessions as an observer. I thought it would be straightforward. Just sit in the public gallery, watch how she interacted with clients and opposing parties, and report back to Alexander about whether the complaints had any merit. I had absolutely no idea I was about to experience firsthand exactly the kind of discriminatory treatment those clients had been describing in their formal complaints. The morning I decided to visit the courthouse, I dressed exactly like I always do when I want to feel comfortable and confident. I put on my favorite pair of dark jeans that fit perfectly and made me feel at ease, paired with a soft lavender sweater that Alexander had bought me during our first trip together to visit his sister in Portland. I added my grandmother's vintage cardigan, the one with tiny pearl buttons that she wore to every important occasion, and slipped on my most comfortable canvas sneakers that I'd had resoled twice because they were perfectly broken in. I left all the expensive jewelry Alexander had given me at home, wearing only my simple wedding ring and the small silver cross necklace my grandmother gave me for my 16th birthday. Instead of carrying one of the designer purses that came with being Alexander's wife, I grabbed my trusty canvas messenger bag that had carried me through community college and countless diner shifts. Looking in the bathroom mirror, I saw exactly what I wanted to see: a normal 26-year-old woman ready to observe a court proceeding without drawing any unnecessary attention to herself. I looked approachable, genuine, and completely unremarkable, which seemed perfect for quietly observing how Victoria treated people during legal proceedings. I had no possible way of knowing that this ordinary, comfortable outfit would soon make me the target of the most humiliating public experience of my entire life. The Jefferson County Courthouse downtown is an impressive building that Alexander had described with obvious pride during our early conversations about his career. It's a historic structure with marble columns imported from Italy, intricate ceiling murals that tell the story of justice throughout American history, and mahogany courtrooms that have witnessed decades of important legal decisions. As I walked up those marble steps and through the heavy wooden doors, I should have felt proud knowing my husband had argued countless cases within these walls, fighting for justice and representing people who needed strong legal advocacy. Instead, I immediately felt intimidated and out of place among all the professionally dressed lawyers and court staff hurrying between courtrooms with their important-looking briefcases and urgent conversations. The moment I entered the courthouse lobby, I could feel curious eyes assessing my casual appearance. Other people waiting for court proceedings were dressed in their Sunday best, understanding that courtrooms demanded a certain level of formality and respect. Men wore pressed suits, or at least dress pants with button-down shirts. Women wore conservative dresses or professional blazers with dress shoes that clicked authoritatively across the marble floors. And then there was me, standing in the middle of this formal environment wearing jeans and sneakers like I was heading to the grocery store instead of observing legal proceedings. I tried to remind myself that I was just there as a silent observer, that nobody would pay attention to one more person in the public gallery, but it was impossible to ignore the obvious contrast between my appearance and everyone else's understanding of appropriate courtroom attire. I found courtroom 3B, where Victoria Pemberton was scheduled to argue a custody case, and quietly took a seat in the back row of the public gallery. The courtroom itself was beautiful, with rich wood paneling and tall windows that let in natural light, creating an atmosphere that demanded respect for the legal process and the important decisions being made. As I settled into my seat and pulled out a small notebook to take discreet observations, I had no idea that within the next hour, I would become the center of a courtroom drama that would test everything I believed about dignity, justice, and standing up for yourself when powerful people try to make you feel small and worthless. Victoria Pemberton entered the courtroom like she owned it, and in many ways, she did. At 34 years old, she was everything I wasn't. Tall, blonde, impeccably dressed in a tailored charcoal suit that probably cost more than I used to make in 3 months at the diner. Her heels clicked with authority against the marble floor. Her briefcase was genuine leather that gleamed under the courtroom lights, and she carried herself with the kind of confidence that comes from never having been told she didn't belong somewhere. She was representing the father in a custody dispute, a man who owned several car dealerships and wanted primary custody of his 8-year-old daughter. The mother, sitting across the aisle with her court-appointed attorney, looked nervous and kept smoothing down her department store dress that was clean, but obviously inexpensive. I watched Victoria organize her papers with theatrical precision, making sure everyone could see her expensive watch and manicured nails as she prepared for the hearing. When the judge entered and court was called to session, Victoria stood with practiced grace, every movement calculated to demonstrate her superiority over everyone else in the room. The case itself was heartbreaking. The mother, Elena Vasquez, worked 2 jobs to support her daughter after her ex-husband had abandoned them for nearly 3 years. He'd recently come back into their lives after striking it rich with his business expansion, and now wanted custody because he could provide, quote, better opportunities and a more stable environment than a woman who cleaned office buildings at night and worked retail during the day. Elena's court-appointed attorney was clearly overwhelmed, stumbling over legal terminology and failing to present a coherent argument for why Elena deserved to keep her daughter. But Elena herself, when she took the stand, spoke with such genuine love and devotion about her child that it brought tears to my eyes. She talked about reading bedtime stories every night, helping with homework at the kitchen table, and saving up for months to buy her daughter a bicycle for her birthday. That's when Victoria Pemberton showed her true colors. During cross-examination, she didn't just question Elena's testimony, she systematically dismantled her dignity piece by piece. Victoria's voice dripped with condescension as she questioned Elena's work schedule, her living arrangements, even her choice to shop at discount stores for her daughter's clothes. "Mrs. Vasquez," Victoria said, her tone suggesting she was speaking to a particularly slow child, "you're asking this court to believe that a mother who can't even afford to dress appropriately for her own custody hearing can provide adequate care for a growing child?" Elena looked down at her simple dress, her face flushing with embarrassment, and I felt my heart break for this woman who was being attacked not for her parenting abilities but for her financial situation. Victoria continued her assault, questioning Elena's education level, her housing situation, even suggesting that working night shifts made her an unfit mother. I was furious but tried to remain professional, taking notes about Victoria's behavior for my report to Alexander. But as the hearing continued, Victoria's treatment of Elena became increasingly cruel and unnecessary. She would interrupt Elena's answers, speak to her like she was stupid, and make snide comments about people who don't understand how the real world works. During a brief recess, I stepped out to the hallway to get some air and process what I was witnessing. That's when I overheard Victoria talking to another attorney about the case, and her words made my blood boil. "Honestly, these people shouldn't even be allowed to have children," Victoria was saying, her voice carrying clearly down the marble corridor. "Look at her, dressed like she's going to Walmart instead of a courtroom. The father might not be perfect, but at least he understands the importance of maintaining appearances and social standards." Her colleague laughed uncomfortably. "Come on, Victoria, don't you think that's a bit harsh? She seems like she genuinely loves her kid." "Love doesn't pay for private school or piano lessons," Victoria replied coldly. "That little girl deserves better than food stamps and hand-me-down clothes. Some people just need to accept that they're not equipped for certain responsibilities." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. This woman was supposed to be an officer of the court, someone dedicated to justice and fairness, and she was talking about Elena like she was less than human simply because she didn't have money. I thought about my own humble background, about all the nights my grandmother and I ate beans and rice so she could save money for my school supplies. When we returned to the courtroom, Victoria's questioning became even more aggressive. She brought up Elena's credit score, her lack of a college education, and questioned whether someone who clearly doesn't understand basic financial management could make important decisions about a child's future. Elena was crying now, not because she couldn't answer the questions, but because Victoria was systematically destroying her character in front of a judge who would decide her daughter's fate. Elena's attorney objected several times, but Victoria was too skilled at walking the line between aggressive advocacy and outright harassment. That's when I made a decision that would change everything. I couldn't sit silently and watch this woman be torn apart, simply because she didn't fit Victoria's definition of an acceptable mother. I stood up from my seat in the gallery, my notebook still in my hands. Objection, I said loudly, my voice carrying clearly through the courtroom. The judge looked confused. Excuse me, miss, but you're not an attorney in this case. Please take your seat. Victoria turned around to see who had dared interrupt her performance, her eyes immediately scanning my casual outfit with obvious disdain. Your Honor, she said with a smirk, it appears we have a spectator who doesn't understand courtroom protocol. Perhaps security should escort her out so we can continue with actual legal proceedings. I felt every eye in the courtroom turn to me, and for a moment I almost sat back down. But then I looked at Elena, who was wiping tears from her eyes while her daughter's future hung in the balance, and I found my voice. I understand protocol perfectly, I said calmly. I also understand that what's happening here isn't justice. It's classism disguised as legal advocacy. Victoria's laugh was sharp and cruel, echoing through the courtroom. Oh, how precious. We have a social justice warrior who thinks she understands the law better than trained attorneys. Let me guess, you read about legal rights on Facebook? The judge was clearly uncomfortable with the disruption, but Victoria was just getting started. She turned fully toward me, abandoning any pretense of professional behavior. Miss, she said, her voice dripping with condescension. This is a courtroom, not a community college debate class. Adults are trying to make important decisions here about a child's welfare. Perhaps you should save your amateur opinions for your book club or wherever people in your situation gather to discuss things they don't understand. The insult hit exactly as intended. Victoria had looked at my jeans and sweater, my canvas bag and simple appearance, and decided I was nothing more than an uneducated troublemaker who didn't belong in her sophisticated world. Just like she'd done to Elena, she was using my appearance to dismiss my voice and my right to speak up for what was right. You're right, I said, my voice steady despite the humiliation burning in my chest. I'm not an attorney, but I know the difference between legal advocacy and public humiliation. What you're doing to Mrs. Vasquez isn't cross-examination. It's character assassination based on her economic status. Victoria's eyes lit up with malicious glee. She sensed weakness, an opportunity to make an example of me in front of the entire courtroom. Character assassination? I'm simply establishing facts about this woman's ability to provide for a child. Unlike some people, I understand that good intentions don't pay for college tuition or medical bills. She stepped closer to where I was standing, her voice rising for maximum dramatic effect. You want to talk about what's best for children? Let me educate you about reality. That little girl needs stability, not food stamps. She needs opportunities, not empty promises from a mother who thinks love is enough to overcome poverty. The courtroom was completely silent now. Even the court reporter had stopped typing to watch this confrontation unfold. Victoria was performing for her audience, demonstrating her power over someone she perceived as powerless. I suppose you think all children should stay with their mothers regardless of circumstances? Victoria continued, her tone becoming increasingly mocking. How wonderfully naive. Let me guess, you probably think we should all just hold hands and sing songs about equality while children suffer because their parents can't provide basic necessities. I felt my cheeks burn with embarrassment, but something deeper was building inside me. Not just anger, but a fierce determination to stand up for Elena and every other person who'd been made to feel small by people like Victoria Pemberton. What I think, I said, my voice growing stronger, is that a mother who works 2 jobs to keep her daughter fed and clothed and loved deserves more respect than you're showing her. What I think is that measuring someone's worth by their bank account says more about your character than theirs. Victoria's smile became predatory. How touching. Tell me, do you have children? Do you understand the first thing about the sacrifices required to raise a child properly? Or are you just another idealistic young woman who thinks good intentions are enough to solve complex problems? The judge finally intervened. Miss Pemberton, please return to your questioning of the witness. And Miss. He looked at me. Please take your seat or I'll have to ask you to leave the courtroom. But Victoria wasn't finished with me yet. She had tasted blood and wanted more. Your Honor, I think this disruption perfectly illustrates my point about understanding one's place in society. Some people simply don't have the education or background to understand complex legal matters, yet they feel entitled to interfere with important proceedings. She turned back to me with cruel satisfaction. Perhaps instead of disrupting court proceedings, you should focus on your own situation. Based on your appearance, you clearly have your own challenges to address before offering advice to others. That's when she made her fatal mistake. Victoria Pemberton, senior associate at Thornfield and Associates, looked me up and down with obvious disgust and said the words that would end her career. Honestly, looking at you, I'm surprised security let you into the building. Did you get lost on your way to the welfare office? The insult hung in the air like poison gas. Several people in the gallery gasped audibly. Elena's attorney looked shocked. Even the court reporter seemed taken aback by the sheer cruelty of Victoria's words. But I just stood there, perfectly calm, reaching into my canvas messenger bag for my phone. I scrolled through my contacts until I found the number I needed and pressed call. "Hi, Alexander," I said, my voice carrying clearly through the now silent courtroom. "I'm in courtroom 3B at the Jefferson County Courthouse. You need to come here immediately. Your senior associate just insulted me in open court, and I think you should hear what she's been saying about your clients." Victoria's face went through several rapid changes as she heard me say Alexander's name. First confusion, then recognition, then a dawning horror as she began to understand exactly who she had just publicly humiliated in front of an entire courtroom. That's not possible," she stammered, her previous confidence evaporating like morning mist. "You can't be… I mean, you're dressed like someone who values substance over appearances." I finished for her, my voice calm and clear. "Like someone who doesn't think expensive clothes make them better than other people? Like someone who was raised to treat everyone with basic human dignity, regardless of their economic status?" The courtroom erupted in whispered conversations as people began to understand what was happening. Some pulled out their phones, probably sensing that they were about to witness something extraordinary. The judge called for order, but even he seemed curious about how this dramatic confrontation would resolve. Victoria tried to recover, her legal training kicking in as she attempted damage control. "Mrs. Thornfield, I had no idea. I was simply advocating zealously for my client as required by professional ethics. Any misunderstanding?" "There's no misunderstanding," I said quietly. "Everyone in this courtroom heard exactly what you said about Mrs. Vasquez and about me. They heard you suggest that poor people shouldn't be allowed to have children. They heard you mock a woman's appearance and circumstances while she fights for her daughter." I looked around the courtroom, making eye contact with the people who had witnessed Victoria's cruelty. "They also heard you insult me for speaking up about it, questioning my education and suggesting I belong at a welfare office rather than in a courtroom where justice is supposed to be blind to economic status." Victoria was beginning to panic now, her perfectly composed facade cracking under the weight of her realization. She had just publicly humiliated the wife of the man who owned her law firm, questioned her intelligence and background, and done it all in front of witnesses who were now recording every word. The courtroom doors opened, and Alexander walked in, followed by 2 members of his firm's security team. Alexander Thornfield doesn't need to announce his presence. People simply know when someone important has entered the room. Conversation stopped, posture straightened, and even the judge seemed to pay closer attention. Victoria's face went completely white as she watched my husband stride across the courtroom toward me, his expression carefully controlled, but his eyes blazing with fury. When he reached me, Alexander's arm went around my shoulders protectively, and I felt some of the tension I'd been holding finally begin to release. "That's my wife you just insulted," Alexander said, his voice quiet but carrying clearly throughout the courtroom. "The woman you suggested belongs at a welfare office instead of in your courtroom. is Jessica Rodriguez Thornfield. And the law firm you work for? I built it from nothing because I believe everyone deserves quality legal representation regardless of their ability to pay. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.